Hello! Yeah, I'm being silly because it's after lunch and we had donuts at the Signal today. I hope you were here for it. But if not, then you missed a conversation about interviewing. So I have a couple of the editors here, Brian and Nix, who are behind camera. And we're going to talk a little bit about some key interviewing skills to make sure that you're approaching things in a way that makes you happy and comfortable and ultimately successful in this key component of any news story, whatever that story is about. So, first thing I want to say, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from the team behind the camera, is that when you're interviewing, even if you're nervous, the key thing to remember is that the person on the other side is more nervous than you are. I promise. That's just the way it is. The power dynamic is weird in an interview. And so one of the key things you need to keep in mind when you are engaging in an interview process is that you need to be respectful of the other person, meaning you need to listen carefully to what they're saying. Pay attention to how they're feeling. Be aware that you are asking them to be vulnerable with you and to trust you with the story that they're telling, to trust that you're going to take that information and use it the way that you say you're going to use it, that you're going to make sure that that person doesn't look stupid, to make sure that what they are saying is coming across in the most accurate way that you possibly can. So that's a lot to ask of the person you're interviewing. So keep in mind that space between the two of you is going to be bridged with your listening skills, with the way you speak with and interact with the person you're interviewing, and then ultimately the way you take that interview and use it in your story. So it's a big thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interview is a big thing.
What type of questions should be asked in an interview?
Oh, that's a good interview question right there. All right. So the questions that you want to ask, one of the key things is that you are going to need to get some information, right? So have a list of the information that you want to get from folks. And the way I keep my interview notes is to do a bullet point list in all caps, nice big font, so that I can see it quickly. I leave a space between to jot down some notes, even though I also always ask people if I can record them. I always ask because in the state of California, you have to have consent, two-party consent, to record anyone. But I take actual written notes. I have a little notebook and pencil here. I take written notes because, one, technology always fails you, and two, it helps me to keep track of what's being said, but also allows me to see where I am on my notes. And typically when I'm asking questions, I will start with something that's going to help build rapport and also build my credibility with the person that I'm interviewing. So, for example, if I were going to interview someone who's working at McDonald's, right? Working the line at McDonald's, I would make sure that I had read what the most current menu items are, what kind of things they're cooking, so that I could show in my first questions, like, wow, so how many Big Macs do you make in a day? And is it true that the fryers that they use for French fries and for chicken nuggets are separate? Is that difficult to manage? That's kind of a silly example, but the point is that I will show that I have thought about what your area of expertise is coming in. And so then if I have more difficult questions like, what's it like working for the meanest manager on the planet? I will have built up some rapport before we get to those questions that require more trust from my interviewee. But the reason that I use this bullet point list with the all caps is that I can listen to what they're saying, and as they answer questions, I can check them off. Because if I'm going in for, say, a 10-minute interview, I'm probably going to have somewhere between 10 and 20 questions that I have thought of in advance. But when I ask one of those questions, chances are pretty good that they're going to answer somewhere between 2, 3, sometimes even 5 of the questions I have. So that's how I develop my questions. Make sure that I establish credibility and then figure out what it is that I need to know for my story, what my readers are going to want to know, and then list out those questions.
Mix it up.
They're putting people on the spot, but you know what's cool about this? this is an aside. They can't tell that I'm talking to you right now. But one of the skills that you can learn when you're learning to interview well is to be comfortable with silence. There's 2 reasons to be comfortable with silence. One is you want to give your interviewee a chance to think and respond. And sometimes that means you need to let them sit and think and be uncomfortable until they're ready to respond. Usually we're the ones that get uncomfortable because we feel like we need to fill that silence, but guess what? We don't. We can just sit and wait. So that's one reason to be uncomfortable with silence. The second reason is that it is okay when you're conducting an interview. Remember what I said early on, the most important thing is to be listening and engaging with that interviewee. So sometimes that means saying, just give me a second, I want to check through my notes and make sure I'm not missing anything important that I want us to talk about today. This is me looking at my notes, checking. Thank you. Okay, so that is completely acceptable. It may seem like a long time to you the first couple of times you do that, but it's not. And also your interviewee, usually they appreciate the break. It gives them a little time to sort of take a breath, think about what they're talking about, what they care about. So it's sort of a nice thing to be able to do.
So when do you eventually want to move into a back and forth that's less question and response into a more conversational sort of, more conversational structure format? And how do you take notes once it sort of evolves into something more free form and less addressing things on a question by question basis?
Good. Excellent question. Excellent question. So my answer to the first part of that is it depends. 90% of the time, absolutely. That's where we want to go, is into a conversation with people. That's ultimately what an interview is, and that's what we want to achieve. But there are a few exceptions. For example, we just got a sports reporter this week. Woohoo! And that sports reporter is sometimes going to have to interview a coach or interview the athletic director. And the coach and athletic director are not going to want to have a one-on-one conversation with you that's in depth unless it is a profile. If you're just asking them, they just want you to get to the point, boom, 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 give me those questions so I can answer them and be out in 3, right? And sometimes if you're interviewing an executive, it's the same thing. But most of the time we're interviewing students, professors, experts, small business owners, and those folks we do want to have a conversation with. And so I handle that in a couple of ways. So those quick questions, some of which we may know the answers to early on, things like, I just want to make sure, I know that your name is Nick's Carbone-Deep. I want to make sure that I am spelling that correctly. Is it this? Or let them spell it for you. So those sort of things, as we start to move into things that your interviewee is comfortable with, you may ask questions that are not on your list because you're listening and you follow up. But the question about how to take notes on that, I write really messy and big. I don't try to conserve paper for real. It sounds like a joke, but it's not a joke. When I'm taking notes, if Nick's were telling me something super interesting that I want to make sure I have, I'm going to start writing it like this. And it's going to get really dang messy. And I'm going to have to go through a lot of paper. Good. So that I can keep making that eye contact while I'm taking messy notes. And I might even circle a thing to come back to so that as Nick finishes that round, I might come back and say, I just want to make sure that I took my notes right on that. I'm super interested in when you first fell in love with Foucault. So you said it was during this class. Is that correct? Fantastic. All right. Did you expect to love Foucault? I don't actually know if Nick likes Foucault or not. I can't remember. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, that is how I handle that.
Let's take this back to the beginning here. How should you start an interview?
Excellent question. That is such a fun thing because this can help you with your nerves when you're starting an interview if you have sort of a standard regimen that you go through. And what I always do is, hi, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. Again, I'm Shannon, and this is my first semester working for the Signal. We're very happy that you were willing to be interviewed for the student newspaper here on campus. Just want to make sure you're comfortable with me recording this interview. I'm doing that for my note taking, but also so that we